I had a very scary experience happen to me in 2017 that has stuck with me throughout the years, and I'm wondering if you all could possibly help me explain what I witnessed in the woods all those years ago. I was about 16 at the time, and I am half indigenous. I was visiting my uncle on my mom's side, the indigenous side, at his cabin located in the woods of northwestern Maine because I was driving my grandpa up to visit them for the fall season. The cabin was rather small and could only accommodate my uncle, auntie, and grandpa, so I was told to sleep in the camper that was set back further into the woods. That evening went by as usual. Auntie made dinner and we all laughed and shared stories and eventually turned in for the night. I took a flashlight and started my way out to the camper. About halfway down, I shut off the flashlight and looked up to admire the night sky. It was at this point I noticed how quiet the forest had become. There were no birds or sounds of crickets or rustling leaves, just pure silence. I suddenly got this intense feeling of dread deep within my gut, and the hair on the back of my neck stood up. The voice in my head told me to bolt to the camper as fast as I could. For some reason, my instincts told me I didn't belong there, and something was watching me. When I made it to the camper, I slammed the door shut and double-locked it, closing the window blinds. I swear I could hear my heart pounding in my ears as I laughed at myself for getting so worked up over nothing. The entire night, I was restless in my sleep. I couldn't help but hear footsteps and movement all around the camper. I told myself it was just curious animals and grazing deer, but my dreams were haunted by something I couldn't see. Unfortunately, this would not be my final experience of the weekend. By morning, all seemed normal. I thought about mentioning what had happened to my grandfather over breakfast, but I was worried that he would brush me off as being overdramatic or being too used to the city life. I let the odd nights slide off my mind as I enjoyed the day with my family and their big shepherd Frank. Just to calm my nerves, I asked for Frank to accompany me in the camper that evening to ensure I felt safe. The walk back was once again fine until I began to enter the tree line. I'm not sure if it was because I was feeling nervous as well, but Frank seemed to be on edge with his ears perked and head on a swivel. That night, he slept in the bed of the trailer with me. I felt safer with the dog there. However, I had an extremely awful dream in which when I awoke, Frank was staring at the wall of the trailer with his hackles standing on end. When the morning hit, I packed my bags to leave in the afternoon and brought Frank of the trailer and lead him out to the small field between the cabin and the thick woods. I was kicking his ball for him to excitedly chase, grab, and return to me. We continued this game until I kicked the ball a bit too hard and it rolled right down to the edge of the woods. Frank raced down to grab the ball until his full sprint turned into a full stop, digging his paws into the dirt meters past where the ball had landed. He was standing stiff, fur on end, ears pinned back and unmoving. I called for him to come, which he always responded to, but he didn't even acknowledge me. I began to walk down to where he was, calling his name a little bit louder still with no response. I grabbed him by the collar, getting kind of worried at this point as his eyes stared directly into the trees. I yelled his name loudly, giving him a little tug. The forest was silent. Moments later, the silence was broken by an echo of my voice yelling back. However, this echo was delayed and distorted. It sounded like me, but also not like me. I froze and looked into the dark woods, holding my breath only for another scream to come from the woods in my voice. I immediately turned and booked it back to the cabin. I came to my auntie, crying and trying to tell her that there was something out there in those woods. She comforted me and told me it must have been nothing, but she seemed as if that was not the answer she wanted to give. My family is rather superstitious, especially me, and I'm guessing she didn't want me to overthink anything. I left that afternoon and I have not been back since that weekend. A friend of mine told me to share my story on this thread, as you all might have an idea of what I experienced. I'm not sure if I'm dealing with a cryptid, bad spirit, or just an overactive imagination. This is a true story. It happened to a friend of mine. We live in Canada, in a small community in northern Saskatchewan. The population of this town is no more than 500 people. Every winter when the lakes freeze over, my friend's cousin and his parents go out to their cabin to go ice fishing. If you thought a town of 500 sounds small, you should see where this cabin is. Not another one in sight for miles around. My friend's cousin always talks about how boring it is out there and how creepy the nights can be with all the sounds of the animals howling and growling. But this one particular ice fishing trip was different. Much different. You see, the events to follow could be enough to chill you to the bone, and goes as such. The family got out to the cabin and set up camp, brought all their gear to the ice hut, and everything was going as usual. The days were boring, the nights cold and full of the sounds of the animals to which my friend's cousin hated so much. Until the third night out there, when everything changed. During the middle of the night, they heard a sound, a loud thud against the wall of the cabin, followed by the cries of an injured deer. This reasonably freaked my friend's cousin out, so he went to his parents to see if they knew what it could be. Probably just a wolf or a bear catching a midnight snack. His parents told him, but that didn't seem to sit just right. Unsettled, the boy went back to sleep. The next morning, he decided to look around the cabin for any clues to ease his mind. What he found would turn his blood cold. A large pool of blood stained the snow by the cabin, with tracks surrounding it. Wolf tracks, it looked like. That wasn't the part that bothered the boy so deeply, though. Leading out of the forest towards the stained snow was a set of human footprints, and from the looks of it, whoever came out of those woods was barefoot. That's when my friend's cousin noticed the trail of blood leading back to the woods. As if whoever was hiding in there killed this wolf and dragged the carcass back to God knows where. My friend's cousin went back to the cabin and refused to go back out for the rest of the day. When his parents asked why, he explained his findings, but they simply brushed it off, saying it was impossible. I mean, there was no one around for miles, let alone a barefooted psychopath hiding in the woods killing wolves. That very night would change all of their lives forever. Laying in bed, eyes wide open, replaying every possibility in his head, the boy heard another loud thud. Rushing to his parents to see if they heard it too, agitated, they told him it was nothing out of the ordinary and to just go back to bed. Roughly 20 minutes later, the boy heard a scraping sound, almost like nails on a chalkboard, and it was coming from the common room of the cabin. The boy rushed to the window, hoping to catch whatever it was to prove his parents wrong, but as soon as he got there was nothing to be found. Discouraged, he shook his head, cussed under his breath, and went to head back to bed. That's when he heard it. A faint knock on the cabin door. Knowing there wasn't supposed to be another human soul anywhere to be found, this sent a chill down his spine. He rushed to his parents, completely distraught, exclaiming, "There must be someone or something out there." Until reluctantly, the father got out of bed and decided to take a look. The father threw on his boots and parka, looked back at his family, and jokingly said, "If I'm not back in 10 minutes, send a search party," before heading out the door. Little did he realize this would be his last words to his family. 10 minutes had passed, and worried, the boy asked his mother if they should go looking. The mother agreed, but told her son not to leave an earshot from the cabin. So the boy, just like his father, threw on his boots and parka and left the cabin. The second he opened the cabin door, though his heart sank. There at the cabin door laid a trail of blood, just like he found earlier that day, leading to the woods with bare human footprints. But it was when he scanned the forest brow that he would realize it was all but too late for his father. Just at the edge of the woods, he could barely make out the silhouette of a man just standing there with a monstrous grin. White teeth just glistening in the moonlight. Frozen in fear, he realized his worst nightmares were coming true, and he couldn't even move. The man at the edge of the forest started taking long strides towards the cabin until the boy could make out his full figure. Tall but lanky, unnaturally lanky. The man's knuckles almost seemed to drag through the snow as he lifted one long arm and stretched out a single skeleton-like finger. He pointed towards the door of the cabin. The boy, shaking now, turned his head to find a message written on the door in blood. The message simply read, "Knock knock. Screaming, the boy ran to his mother and explained what he had just witnessed. She almost didn't believe him until she saw the message herself. Believing the message was written in the father's blood, they ran for their truck to make a hasty escape from whatever this crazed creature in the woods could be. The mother turned the key, but to no avail. The boy, looking through the windows, terrified once again, caught a glimpse of the man at the edge of the woods. He was making his way towards the truck, and fast. With long strides, just as before, it seemed like he would be on top of them in seconds. The mother tried again, praying the truck would start, and surely it did. Just as the man reached the tailgate of the truck, they sped off into the night. Looking in the mirror, the boy could see the man, beast in the distance. It wasn't perusing them, just standing there, barefoot in the snow, waving goodbye with one lanky arm and cackling the most blood-curdling laugh the boy had ever heard in his life. To this day, the father has never been found, and my friend's cousin and his mother have never returned to the cabin since that night. This is a true story, believe me. I was there, standing barefoot at the edge of the woods. A midnight visitor in a cabin in the woods. This is a true story. Every time I tell it, it pulls the eyes of everyone in the room. I'm not sure why I haven't posted it before, but upon reflecting with a friend, I decided it was time to share. In the summer of 2020, my friends Alex and Violet and I decided to go on a mountain vacation. COVID cabin fever had hit us hard, and we were desperate to get out. We settled on a mountainous state and planned to camp and hike at several different locations. For one night, we thought it would be fun to book a cabin in the woods. Violet's parents had rented a fire tower once and loved it, but a cabin beside a fire tower was all we could find. It was cheap, clean, and secluded. Excited to have a night where we could be as obnoxious as we wanted, we booked it. In the weeks leading up to the trip, we decided it would be a great idea to drop acid at the cabin. Violet bought an entire sheet in preparation for our arrival, and it was tucked in her bag as we pulled out of the driveway to make our way to the cabin. I remember this knot in the pit of my stomach, this aching feeling that gnawed at me. I told Alex and Violet that there was no way we could drop acid that night. Violet was pissed. We turned around and got into a massive argument, but I stood my ground. I just knew that we had no business tripping that night. Finally, the fireworks settled and we were off. The cabin was roughly 30 minutes away from the nearest town. It sat atop a mountain. We held our breath as we rounded the busted road that spiraled toward the top. There were no pull-offs, no other campsites, just a long, winding road that led us to the cabin at the peak. We settled in and started a fire to keep warm. As dusk gave way to night, we heard the unmistakable noise of an engine on the road, then the flash of headlights. A side-by-side with 3 kids arrived, and our nerves settled. They smiled, gave us a wave, climbed the fire tower, and left. We'd heard there may be occasional visitors to the fire tower, but they were the only ones who'd come by. We doused the fire and moved inside, heated some hot dogs until they were lukewarm, ate them fast, and sat in the silence. You don't know how quiet it is until you're in the middle of nowhere. You can hear every rustle of the leaves, the whisper of the wind through their branches. You get so used to white noise. Living in the city, there's always the hum of an air conditioner or the dim roar of traffic to focus on. Here, the closest thing to white noise was the sound of our own breathing. We jumped at every noise, too frightened to speak to one another. And finally, I'd had enough. I cracked a few wine coolers, passed them to Alex and Violet, and slapped a board game down on the table between our bunk beds. It didn't take long for us to loosen, and we were laughing, having the raucous good time we'd envisioned. Much soberer than we'd thought, but enough that we were able to ignore the rumble of the woods. Later, we'd all recall hearing noises in the background. The snap of a twig, the dim rumble of an engine. None of us wanted to rupture the air of nonchalance between us, so we ignored it, until a human hand reached up to the window between us and slapped it 3 times. We were screaming in an instant. Alex called 911, put them on speakerphone, and handed his cell to me. He grabbed pokers from the fireplace and passed them out. Violet started calling family members and saying her last goodbyes. I held my breath and listened for any more noise. Whoever this was, whatever this was, would have heard us call 911, and now they were being careful to make a silent retreat. Dispatch arrived 20 minutes later, a lucky thing for a 1 a.m. emergency call, and had their dogs comb the mountain. Nothing. They suggested it may have been a bear, but I could tell from their faces that they didn't believe that for a second. We'd barely cooked those hot dogs, and why would a bear smack the window by a couple of screaming kids rather than the one closest to the pan we'd used to cook? Why would a bear knock on the window like a human? Why, when we screamed, did the bear make a stealthy retreat? They had no answers. But they had one anecdote. As they'd sped to us, they'd come across a car at the base of the mountain, but that was the only sign of life they'd seen. I remember my blood ran cold. But Violet and Alex were too frazzled to absorb the weight of what they'd said, and dizzied by a new horror. Violet's car, thoroughly dusted by our drive up the mountain, was covered in handprints. Handprints that didn't match ours, that touched places we hadn't. We grabbed our shit by the armful and threw it inside, eager to remove every part of ourselves from this mountain. We followed the police, grateful every pothole found us further and further from that wretched cabin. We made it down in record time and found lodging at a seedy hotel that reeked of cat piss. I couldn't sleep. The thought of that car on the road rang in my head. Remember, there was nothing else on that mountain. It was a narrow road to the top, no pull-offs, no other campsites. There was the fire tower. Maybe a visitor decided to spook us during their late-night excursion? But the kids from earlier. We'd seen their headlights. Whoever did this had stopped their vehicle further down the road and hiked the rest of the way. They didn't want to be spotted. They wanted silence, secrecy. Whoever this was hadn't been looking for a cheap scare. They'd planned this. I don't think I'll ever know what the person on the mountain wanted from me. I don't know if it was a practical joke or the beginning of a night of terror. I'm grateful for Alex's quick wit in calling 911. I wonder if our visitor knew we had service? It had certainly been a welcome surprise to us. Perhaps that was a wrench in his plan, enough to spook him before he could make things ugly. In truth, I don't know if I want to know. I think I'm just content to say, midnight stranger, let's not meet. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the stories, please consider subscribing. I'm on the road to 100.